Hello and welcome to PMI's Uncommon Sense podcast, tools to improve your work forever. I'm Susanna Clark, Managing Partner with PMI. Our Uncommon Sense podcast is a 15-minute conversation with our expert consultants. They talk a lot of common sense, although much of it is not common practice. And that's what this podcast is all about. We want you to be inspired to improve your business through learning more about the tools which can help you succeed and grow. Today, I'm joined by Byrne, one of PMI's director consultants. Good to see you today, Barry.
Hello, Sue. It's good to see you too.
We're going to talk today about TPM. Now, I think one of the things that I would just like to get set before we go is TPM, a lovely three-letter abbreviation, which I had previously commonly heard referred to as Total Preventative Maintenance. That's not what you think it stands for, is it?
Well, I can give you any combination of expressions, and I think part of the problem is that the definition has as many applications as.
Okay.
Let me give you my experience and a little bit of the background. So where am I coming from here? So I worked for a very product volatile, reactive organization in newspaper publishing, moved into fast-moving consumer goods. And when I moved into this new organization, they had a program of TPM that was total productive manufacturing. In other words, the entire system of manufacturing. And I came into this program, if you will, where it was holistic, it was systemic, it was optimal. So consequently, it wasn't functionally based. It meant that what the organization needed to produce, in other words, the value to the customer, was all functional accountability, typically the system approach that we talk about every day with our clients. So as a consequence of that, I've never let go that systemic, holistic, integrated approach to business transformation. So that's TPM for me. However, I do recognize there are, if you will, almost subsets of this bigger systemic approach. And that I would suggest is your total preventative maintenance or total productive maintenance, as we'll often hear. I actually like the expression total preventative maintenance because that highlights one of the challenges we have in A, understanding what it is, and B, setting about to make it happen.
Okay. So having got it straight what we're going to talk about, which I think is always a good start, Barry.
Yeah.
Do you want to give us the context of this in that sense of a systemic approach?
Okay, so I think what's really important about TPM, irrespective of whichever branding it's going to be using, is that when we consider the need of the value stream needs to operate optimally, and irrespective of where you come from in the Lean or a Six Sigma world or whatever, it is always about velocity and optimization and minimum loss, minimum downtime. Now, we very, very closely focus in the Lean world on minimizing downtime. In other words, minimizing disruption. So we focus on minimum inventory and work in progress. So therefore, we have maximum velocity of the customer orders through our value stream. Now, if you have assets, and of course the definition of assets is an interesting topic for another day, but if you have assets that are unreliable or are not necessarily subject to a preventative maintenance program, that naturally contributes to the challenge of how do we maintain smooth and consistent flow? How do we maintain that balanced flow? So therefore, maintenance and the maintenance of our assets is central to, as well as other Lean approaches, to making sure that the customer's orders flows through. So you can only get continuous flow if all of our assets, including processes, are operating 100% of the time. We don't have the luxury of equipment breakdowns or stoppages, inevitably, obviously, because of this requirement for us to deliver the customer's requirements. So the TPM program, irrespective of how you're going to call that, is focused on keeping all of our assets in optimal condition such that they are available when we want them, how we want them, where we want them, and then minimizing any breakdowns or delays in terms of operation of that process. Put the tag on it, whatever you will.
And I just want to pick up on your point about, assets, bigger conversation, of course, but you included specifically processes as assets. So anyone who's thinking, I'm going to stop listening now because I haven't got equipment in my business, I might be a call center or I might be a typical service industry. This applies to you too, because
Absolutely.
if your processes break down, work stops.
Absolutely. And we often, and there is the key point, Suze, we often don't consider processes as assets. That it isn't just physical equipment bolted to the floor. That physically it's making something. I put in some raw product in one end and it delivers something at the other end. Every process does that. It takes inputs and transforms them into outputs. So as a consequence of that, whilst this may well be philosophical to some, I think it's absolutely imperative that we consider this to be in the context of having to transform something of value to the customer. And that doesn't have to be equipment. I think for the purposes of this, very often we do talk about equipment and we talk about the relationship, the functional relationship, about how we maintain that. And as you've already referenced, how we prevent failure, how we prevent a breakdown. In actual fact, the hallmarks of TPM, certainly from my experience, has always been that the goal of TPM is to continually, and I think that's a really important point, is continually strive to achieve perfect operations. And in that case then, irrespective of the process, that would be the same in a call center, it would be the same in a process operation as much as it would be within a manufacturing environment. So we're talking about literally zero breakdowns, so the process doesn't stop. Running slower than it should be, and I think we can put that into context of a lot of our client work. And minimum defects. In other words, there are no characteristics of the product that the customer wouldn't accept. So I do like that build, and it's important that we built on that early.
Okay. So tell me, what are the key things if you're working in this environment or you're looking to establish this environment, then, what are the key things that we need to be thinking about and need to have in place that perhaps maybe we've not necessarily got our focus on at the moment?
Okay, so I think the one area that was particularly relevant and focused when I first encountered TPM was this recognition of loss. Was the basic principle that for the given time allocated to do whatever was required to be done, and in a typical week, if it's a 24/7 operation, that's 168 hours. And the basic concept that said, are we truly cognizant of how we're making use of all of those? And almost like this mindset of acceptability, a process that's available 80 to 90% of the time is acceptable. A process that's delivering 95% conforming product is acceptable, and so on and so forth. And of course, my coaching very clearly was that is not acceptable. And therefore the need to generate data. So the whole process of not just collecting this thing, but what did we need to know? How does the work? What information, what data will inform us in terms of decisions to be made about where we need to focus. So this whole concept of loss was one that was very, very a significant emphasis. It therefore calls into question our ability to collect good data, interpret that data, and to respond to that data, which of course are three very different activities. So this is not something that we should endeavor or see as an endeavor that's relatively straightforward to enable. The reality is good data enables us to interpret, enables us to make good decisions. So this has held me, I think, throughout now, is data informs our decision-making process. And irrespective of whether it's TPM, Lean Six Sigma, it doesn't matter, or no methodology whatsoever. They're the key characteristics. So of all of the things I would consider loss, the partner to that, of course, has to be a mindset shift. And I think perhaps, we may be accused, it's always a mindset shift. Well, in TPM terms, I am also left in no doubt that the mindset of collaboration and integration, it was quite interesting to me, and I've seen this repeated many times in textbooks and so forth, academic studies, this concept that people operate the process and there are others who fix it. Yeah. And that is clearly not an environment within which the whole concept of loss and loss elimination and continuous flow can dominate. So it does require us to, exploit, if you will, in the nicest sense, the capability of the people who operate the process itself. So there's some fairly basic conditions. It is about engagement, those who do the work. Engaging them often in this seems somewhat difficult conversations in terms of ownership of the processes and systems that enable them to do what they need to do. So this is less about the tools and techniques and more about influence and inspiring people to want to be part of this. And if I was to suggest that using data and generation of data and the diagnosis of how the work works enabled us to establish a culture where people felt safe and comfortable to be able to share with us, of these 168 hours, where were the 42 going? Because we could only account for 90 of them. Now, I looked at this over a period of time in order to understand within a typical business, where else is that focus? Where else might the focus be on loss? And it seems to me that the danger is the sense that it's operations' fault that we're losing those 40 hours, or it's maintenance fault, of course, is an anathema. We encounter losses that are far removed from operators' influences and maintenance influence. For example, raw material, and the procuring of raw material and the specifications behind raw material. We're also divorced often from the purchasing of the equipment itself, the assets themselves, the specification, the design speeds. So often, it seems to me that operations, and I mean this with the greatest respect, are often felt done too, but nonetheless, that is typically where we go to understand why are we not getting this product out. And I think our studies well know that cause and effect separated from time and space. We see the effect often in the production system or those who operate the process. But how often do we go to look at the root causes? And they're often upstream. So we've said a great deal, but I'm absolutely passionate about this. And consequently, engaging with PMI in terms of our approach to, system thinking, it sat very comfortably with me. And, irrespective of the title that we use on this, if we consider to be holistic, systemic, integrated, data to inform, I think we're on. That's for me, we're pointing in the right direction.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much, Barry. I have to say, just a final word from me. I was very struck by the words you used, the continuously striving to achieve perfect operations. And of course, that is exactly what we're trying to achieve in whatever sector we work.
Yes. Yeah.
And this is all in the spirit of that. But that in order to do that, you've got to have that environment in which people are comfortable, confident, because they're trusted to admit those losses. And so that's part of creating that environment, a really important part.
It absolutely is. And my first encounters with the expression world class was in the early 90s, in a data sense, in a quantifiable sense. Of course, we see world class defined as an expression, but actually, unless you produce the data that supports that. And when we look at Taguchi model, talking about world class being on target with minimal variation, actually, this is one of the first occasions in which we actually are able to put numbers to it. Now, the numbers themselves, a world-class organization classically is considered to have an OEE of 85%. which even then suggests, as we know, that there's variation in everything. So as a consequence, it's that continual demand, that thrust to minimize the losses, because we'll never eliminate them. But actually, you've got to know where they are and be able to measure them, and therefore do something about them.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Barry. That was excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome, Fizz. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. You can find more episodes of our Uncommon Sense Tools to Improve Your Work Forever in our Knowledge Hub on our website, or, of course, your favourite podcast platform. And do subscribe so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to check out the show notes for this episode, where you'll find links to more content on this topic, which includes webinar recordings, toolbox guides, blogs, and infographics, and our training page. You can always drop us a line on team@pmi.co.uk and arrange a time to have a call to talk about how these tools can help you in your organisation. We'd really love to hear from you.